want to thank everybody for the opportunity to come and share with you. Last week at this time, we had no idea we would be here. At the last minute, Boriana said, "You need to come and see us because we're not going to be able to go to Idaho this summer." And so she said, "I'm going to get tickets, and I'll look for tickets." And then on Sunday, she said, "Oh, we couldn't find any tickets because they're too expensive." So when I saw the look on my wife's face, I knew I had to do something because she was so disappointed. So I went up online and I found some tickets, but I had to get off work, and it's hard at the last minute, to get some other doctors to work for me. And so I found some tickets for like about $630, but I couldn't get them. They said there's only 2 tickets left. And I couldn't get them because I had to check and see if I could get off work. 30 minutes later, when I got on, it was $860. In 30 minutes, that's all it took. And so I was pretty amazed that I think they saw that I was looking for tickets, and so they immediately started raising the prices, and so that was not good. I need Jasper to come up and tell me how to work this watch that we just got. So anyway, we were able to get some tickets at a little better price, and had a little glitch because our plane was an hour and a half late leaving Denver, and we had to spend the night in Chicago, which is my least favorite place to be. But we got here yesterday morning, and you're 3 hours ahead of us in time, so I think I'm caught up on our sleep a little bit. So this afternoon, I would like to just share, I've been asked to share some things about mission stories. When I was raised in Guatemala, my folks were missionaries. My father was the president of the mission there. And I loved when people came through from the General Conference and from the division and from the union. And I would say, "Tell us some stories, tell us some stories." And I especially like the snake stories and the lion stories and animals and those kind of stories. And so I think that this afternoon, I don't want to entertain you, but I don't want anybody to go to sleep. So I have to keep you awake, but I hope it will be inspiring for you. And as you see some miracles happen that have happened and are happening right now, some of the things I'm sharing with you today are brand new and are just happening. And so I'm excited about the way the Lord is blessing us. And He will bless anyone, I believe. He'll bless each one of us if we just step out in faith. Like it said in our lesson this morning, we need to have more faith. We need to exercise our faith. Like the man said, "Lord, I believe, but help me to have more faith." And so that's what I'd like to do this afternoon, is to inspire you. And anything that I say this afternoon is not to glorify me or my team that I've been with. It's only to glorify God. And if it wasn't me, God would use somebody else. And anytime somebody thinks they're a big shot, God will pass them by, and He will find somebody humble to do the work. And so that's what I want to be, as a humble servant of His. Like my dad used to say, he said, "I don't care if I get into heaven, I will be willing to sweep the floors in the temple up there, just so I can get through the door. I don't care what position I have in heaven." And that's kind of the way I feel. And in fact, all of us probably feel that way, that it's not about glorifying ourselves, because of ourselves we have nothing. Without Jesus, we have absolutely nothing to boast about. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Second Hope Ministries before. We've been around for about 10 years. And the purpose is to bring hope for this life and to bring hope for a future life. And so that's what it says, second hope. Not just hope for this life, but hope for the eternal life. Many teams from other denominations, even Catholic, have some very good medical teams, but they're only giving hope for this life, some of them. Or some of them are only giving hope for eternal life, but they don't give any hope for this life. And so that's what we're trying to do. As a physician, I have found that many people are very depressed. They're very lonesome. They're sad. They have health problems. They have family problems, financial problems. And so one of the things that we can do, we're told that the medical evangelism work is the best work. In fact, it's the only work. It's the only way that Jesus worked, is with the medical health evangelism. You know, we only have about 7 recorded sermons that Jesus preached in the Bible. You know that? Most of them are in the book of Matthew. But he worked for 3.5 years. So if you figure 3 sermons, I mean, this number of sermons in 3.5 years, that's not very many. Most of the time he was working one-on-one with people. He was talking to people. And he liked to work with people that were hopeless and hapless and helpless. That was his specialty. He found people that everybody else gave up on, and that's the kind of people that Jesus liked to work with. And if we're going to work like Jesus, then that's what we have to do too. And sometimes, one of the stories I'm going to tell you this afternoon, every time I tell the story, I can't believe it actually happened, because it's the very people that we think are the least likely to accept Jesus. They're the ones that need him the most. And they will be the best followers of Jesus when they accept him. So we work at home in the United States. We go to different churches and give programs. We do training. We do health evangelism training. And basically, we do what's called the medical in-home training. In other words, we train village health care. We train people how to take care of people when there's no doctor, when there's no nurse, when there's no dentist. What do? How do you deliver a baby when you've never gone to medical school? We train people how to do that in 1 week. We can teach them the basics. We're not teaching them to be a dentist or a doctor, but we're teaching them how to do medical emergencies, how to suture. One of the things that we teach is how to sew up wounds when there's 500 miles to the doctor and they get cut with a machete or whatever. We're not teaching them to do major surgery, but we're teaching them how to do, just skin lacerations and things like this. We teach them medical training with herbs and things like this. One of the big things in underdeveloped countries is parasites. It's not uncommon in some of these countries to have 7 different kinds of worms inside of you at the same time in your intestines. And some of these worms go through your lungs and make you cough. And when a lot of doctors go down for the first time and somebody's coughing, they think they need to give them antibiotics. But in the tropics, when somebody's coughing, it's worms until proven otherwise, because there's 3 different kinds of worms that go through your lungs in their stages of development. And when you give them the worm medicine, I'm not trying to make you sick after just eating, but when you give them the worm medicine, the worms will actually come out of their nose and their mouth and everything as they die. And so this is one of the things. We try to use charcoal. We try to use for charcoal for scorpions, for snake bites and things like this, not as a definitive treatment, but to help until we can get them to the hospital. In some cases, they might have to go in a canoe or ride on an elephant or on a horse or whatever to get to a clinic. And some of the places where I've trained, for instance, in Kenya, we had people, one gentleman was 92 years old. He came and took the training, and he passed all the CPR class and everything, and he had ridden in a canoe, and he rode on an elephant for part of his way to get to our training. And so we train with, thank you. We train with Muslims, thank you, and Catholics. We train with Protestants. And in fact, in Haiti, we trained 85 young people right after the earthquake that killed 250,000 people in 2010. And we had 3 interpreters for Creole and French, and our interpreters kept the first Sabbath after 1 week. And one of them later on became a Seventh-day Adventist and now has his own organization there. So we would much rather train people to do the job instead of just do it for them. A lot of medical teams, they go and they give out pills. Somebody's got high blood pressure, give them 2 or 3 pills. That's like spitting in the wind. That's nothing. In 3 days, the pills are gone. What we try to do is tell them to eat less salt. Don't drink so much coffee. Don't drink so much Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Incidentally, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola are all over the world. Even when they don't have water to drink, they have Coca-Cola, and that's why there's a lot of diabetes and everything else that we see. So this is kind of what we do. And we work in many countries, South Sudan, Kenya, South Africa, Bolivia, Brazil, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Haiti, Italy, Austria. Those are some of the countries where we've been working. And typically we go about once every 3 months, sometimes more often. Our mission is to train disciples to give the gospel to the local people because they can do it better. In some of the Mideastern countries, Americans don't do very well over there. They're not very well liked. And yet if we train people of color that are dedicated to the Lord, they can go places I could never go. So we work with everybody and try to train local people. They know the diet, they know the lifestyle, they're used to the way of living, whereas Americans go over there and they get sick, they can't tolerate the food, and they're not used to the customs. And so I believe that this is what Jesus wants us to do, is to use local people, train them, and then this is what's going to happen. What we found out is that it's becoming very dangerous to go to certain countries right now. So we're starting to shift a little bit more and try to bring them over to us to train. So we might bring 3 or 4 people. Right now we're thinking about bringing some people from Nigeria. And we'll train them and they'll go back. And it's very dangerous where they're working. If we went over there, we might not come back alive. But they live over there. And so they can get by. They can do it. And so this is kind of the trend of the future, I think, in our church is instead of sending missionaries all over the world, we're going to bring them to us, train them, and send them back. And like one time, my dad had a baptism in Guatemala, and there was a little Indian man, simple, barefooted man, and he was baptized, and way up in the mountains in Guatemala. And after the baptism, my dad says, "What do you want to do now with your life? Now that you became a Christian, became a Seventh-day Adventist?" And he said, "Yo quiero ser un misionero. I want to be a missionary. A los Estados Unidos, to the United States." And you might laugh a little bit, but I think the United States probably needs missionaries like that just as much as they need us to go there, because we're becoming more secular, just like in Europe is becoming more and more secular. So this is kind of a little bit about what we're doing. The first story, I have to change my coat for this story. And this story happened in Nicaragua. That's in Central America. And one of the things I always wanted to do, Boriana hid my vest here. I always wanted to have a vest like this because it's really handy to have something like this when you're traveling overseas. It's lightweight. And I got this at REI. I love this vest. And it took me a long time to find one that fit. And I was so excited to get one. And we went to Nicaragua. That's in Central America. And this is the lake here where we were. And I'll see if the town is on here. Rivas, right there. That's where we were. So this story happened right here. And so anyway, when we went there, we partnered with the General Conference. And they have a church, Tridelphia, where most of the General Conference leaders go. And once a year they go on a mission trip. And they partnered with Maranatha. And Maranatha said, "We have a project for you guys, and it's in Rivas, to build a new church there. They've been worshiping under a mango tree for 5 years, and they need a church. In the rain and in the heat, they've been worshiping under this mango tree. And there's 30 or 40 people already." And so they said, they called me and they said, "Would you be willing to come with us with your eyeglass team? Because we give free eyeglasses. And also, would you be in charge of all of our medical team?" So they had several nurses, they had 2 dentists, 3 doctors, and they said, "Will you be in charge of that part so we can build the church and you guys can do the medical part?" So we did. And so we went down there, and in the evening, we trained during the day with the things that I told you, village health care, suturing class, and everything. And in the evening, they had 3 different evangelistic meetings going on all at the same time. And they asked me if I would go to one of these and if I would give a health talk every night. And I had my PowerPoint presentation and a nice little Abundant Life health presentation. And so one of the first things that happened, the first night, I saw this is a dangerous place, because the place where I was going, It was in a barrio, which is like a slum area. Very dangerous. In fact, the taxi driver on the way there, he says, this is very dangerous. You shouldn't be in this area. But this is where they chose to have the evangelistic meeting. It was a dirt road, just poor slum houses all along. And they took a banner and they put across the street with ropes, and they hung a sheet down with 4 corners spread out, and that was the screen. And they had the projector, and this is where they had the evangelistic meeting, right in this terrible, dangerous area of Rivas. So I was kind of sitting back. My part was at the very last, and I was sitting at the back watching, and all of a sudden I heard some shrieks. I heard some screaming and some loud music and some craziness going on right behind us, about 5 houses from where we were having the meeting. They had about 30 chairs, those plastic chairs, sitting in the middle of the street. And so I looked over there, and here was a big party going on. The women and children were all standing around waiting for their husbands to come out of this drug party. And pretty soon they would come out, and they'd be all staggering and, yeah, and just screaming, and it was just out of control. I mean, it sounded like demon possession. It was terrible. And so I thought, man, this is dangerous. I found out later that the drug lord for that whole area, when they went around and invited people to come to these upcoming meetings, he said, if you guys come and hold meetings here, I'm going to kill every one of you. And he killed people, so they knew he was serious. But without telling us how dangerous it was, they went ahead and planned the meetings anyway. So they were having this big party, and pretty soon I said, this is too dangerous. This is bad. The next night, they were at it again, but one of the sons, he's about 17 years old, of one of our people from the General Conference, he was either a little bit not too smart, or else he had a lot of courage and faith, because he walked right over to that drug house where they were selling drugs and invited them to come to the meeting. I would never have had the courage to do that. And so the head guy came out, and he had no shoes, he had shorts on, no shirt, and he was completely intoxicated. And he came out, and he was staggering, and this young man invited him to come to our meetings. And he couldn't speak very good Spanish, so he asked me to go and translate. So I went over there, and to make a long story short, he said he couldn't come to the meeting because he didn't have any clothes. He didn't even have a shirt. His body smelled bad and everything. And so he went over and sat down, and his girlfriend sitting beside him said, he wants to talk to you. He wants a medical consultation. So while the meeting was going on, I went over to see what he wanted. And he said, basically, he says, my life is a mess. I'm the head drug lord for this whole area. I've hurt a lot of people. And he says, I don't like the way my life is. I don't like the way when I'm under drugs. I don't like what I act, the way he says, I'm mean, I'm nasty, and nobody likes me. And he says, I don't know what to do. He says, can you cure me? And I said, well, no, I can't cure you, but I said, I know somebody that can. And he said, well, what? You got to give me something. Give me some medicine or something. And his girlfriend said, he's serious. He said, he's almost ready to take his own life. Could you help him? And finally I told him, I said, I'll tell you a little story. He says, my dad started the Hispanic work in the Yakima Valley, and no Adventist church there. And he held some meetings. And the very first night, a man by the name of Mr. Davila came to the meetings, and he was drunk. His wife brought him. And he had the reputation in the Yakima Valley of fighting anyone and everybody. He loved to fight. He would drink and he would fight, and he had all these 9 children and his wife. And he'd go to the taverns and he would fight. And he said, I told this gentleman, I said, he used to grab people by the legs and by the neck, and he would shove them on the ceiling like that and pound them until they begged for mercy. But he came to the meeting that night. And my dad used to say, if nobody smells like alcohol or tobacco, the right people are not coming to our meetings. So they accepted him, and something happened. The Holy Spirit grabbed a hold of him, and the next night he came, and he wasn't quite so drunk. And I said by the end of the week, he quit drinking, and he became, at the end of the 6 weeks of meetings, I said Jesus entered his heart, he was baptized, and he, till the end of his life, he was the head elder in that new church there in the Yakima Valley. And I said, that can happen to you. And he said, to me? I said, yes, to you. And I said, why don't you come to the meeting? I said, I'm going to have a special meeting just for you. I'm going to say some things just for you. And he said, no, I can't come. I can't come. So we went home that night, and the next night, he sat over there and listened to the whole meeting. He listened to the evangelistic part. He listened to my part. And by the third night, this young man went over again and invited him to come. And he says, Dr. Fleck, come quick and help me. Let's get him to the meeting. So I went over there, and he said, look, I can't come because I don't have a clean shirt or anything. And without even thinking, it was like automatic. I didn't even think. I took off my vest, and I said, here, you can wear this. And he says, can I have that? And without even thinking, I said, yes, it's yours, if you'll come to the meeting. And he couldn't believe it. And so he took it on, he put it on, and he said, man, he liked it. And he says, wow. I didn't tell him it was my favorite vest of all that I've ever had because it worked so good for me. He said, okay, he says, I got to go clean. I'm going to go wash up a little bit, and then I'll try to come. And so pretty soon, here he came with my vest on. Came and he sat right in the middle of those chairs with everybody else. He didn't realize, but I brought a Spanish Bible for him. And at the end of the meeting, I called him up. And he sat through the whole meeting. After my presentation, he came up. I said, come forward. And so he came up, big, buffed up guy, just huge muscles. And he had a little bit of alcohol in his breath, but not as much. He was wearing my vest. And I said to everybody, I said, this man wants to accept Jesus as his Savior. But I said, when you do this, you can't do it by yourself. You guys are going to have to help him. You're going to have to be supportive of him because it's not easy to change your life. I said, how many of you will be willing to try to help him to be a Christian? And everybody raised their hand, probably out of fear that if he didn't become a Christian. And so anyway, I gave him this Bible. I said, this Bible is especially for you. Spanish Bible, pocket Bible. And all of a sudden, he grabbed a hold of me right in front of everybody. And he just gave a bear hug till I could hardly breathe. And he whispered, tears were streaming down his face. And he whispered in my ear, he says, nobody in my entire life has ever given me anything. He said, when you gave me this shirt, that's the first time that anybody in my entire life has ever given me one thing. He said, thank you so much. So I just thought, here's a guy that everybody they were afraid of him because he'd killed people. And yet he was giving his life to Jesus, And I was able to get another vest as soon as I got back. I had to order it from Idaho, but I finally got one because they discontinued the one I liked, but I finally got one. So that was just another thing happened at that same meeting. One night, this was like the last night of the meeting. After I got done speaking, it was about 9 o'clock. We're ready to go back to the hotel. And this lady came up and she said, Dr. Fleck, can you do a medical consult on this lady? And I said, yeah, what's the problem? And she said, I asked the lady, what's the problem? And she said, well, I found out that she makes her living by pushing a cart down the highway and she picks up bottles. And she takes them. She fills her cart with bottles, pop bottles and beer bottles. She takes them in and gets a few cents for it, and that's how she lives. That's her income, is from the bottles every day. And she said, I just came home tonight about 4 o'clock. The meeting started at 7. She got home about 6 o'clock, and it was about 9 o'clock now. And she said, I reached in to get a bottle, and a scorpion got me on my finger. And I said, wow, what time was that? And she said, it was about 6:30 when I got bitten by the scorpion. Her tongue was sticking all the way out of her mouth, swollen. She says, I was numb. I'm numb. My whole face is numb. My whole arm is swelled up about twice its size. And I said, why didn't you tell me at the beginning of the meeting? And she said, I didn't, or two reasons. She said, I didn't want to interrupt you and distract you from your presentation. And secondly, I wanted to hear it. I didn't want to go to the hospital till I heard the presentation tonight. And I'm thinking, how many of us, if we were getting bit by a rattlesnake or a scorpion, would like to listen to the rest of the church service before we went to the hospital? I mean, I would want to go right straight to the emergency room, but she wanted to stay the whole 3 hours, 2.5 hours. Her tongue was sticking clear out of her mouth. Her face was numb. Her arm was all swelled up, just because she didn't want to miss the meeting. And so I said, okay, have you got a car? And she says, yes, my husband has a car. I said, follow us quickly to the to a hotel. I have a big medical bag there. And so we went in there. I gave her a shot of Decadron, which works really good. It's an anti-inflammatory like cortisone. It'll take the swelling down. I gave her some Benadryl intravenously, which is antihistamine. And then we just prayed with her. And I prayed that Lord would please save her life and take care of her. And within about 45 minutes, while we sat there in the lobby of the hospital, her tongue went back in her mouth. Her arm swelling went down. And after about an hour, she said, I think I'm okay to go home. Is it okay if I go home? And I said, yes. And I never forgot that. I thought, a lot of us, if we have a cold or if we don't feel good, we stay home from church or whatever. But here's a lady that could have died, but she wanted to stay and hear the Word of God before she even got treatment for that. And to me, that was a real inspiring story. So the story of Chris and Kathy Leonard, he was a pastor in Switzerland. And in Switzerland, they made a rule. It was an unwritten agreement with the Vatican and with other Protestant churches that the Adventists would not do any more proselytizing in Switzerland. Only if people would come to our church, then we could pass out literature and give them Bible studies, but we couldn't go door to door. We couldn't go on the sidewalk. This is what was happening. And Chris was on fire for the Lord. He was an ordained pastor. And he didn't pay any attention to this ban, and he just started giving Bible studies right and left. And pretty soon he had 20 or 30 people for baptism. And then he gave more studies, and he had another 10 or 15. And finally the authorities in our church called him in and says, hey, you're going to have to cool your jets down, man. You're bringing so many people into the church that we don't even have enough pastors to take care of them. So please don't do any more evangelism. Just take care of the people that are in your church. And so he said he left and went back home, and what do you think he did? He just kept right on doing what he was doing. More baptisms, another 20 or 30 or 40 people, and pretty soon, he's very charismatic, really, really on fire for the Lord. Young guy, he's probably about 35 now. They called him in and they said, back to the conference office, and they said, hey, apparently you didn't understand what we were telling you. You're not to be out evangelizing like this. We have an agreement. We don't want to disturb the Catholics and everybody. And he says, okay, thank you. And so he said he felt a call to go to Austria, where he might be able to do more evangelism. And so he and Kathy and their two little girls, they moved to Austria, to Linz. It's the second largest city in Austria. And so when he was there, in order to make a living, he started selling books, Adventist books, door to door for a year. And at the end of the year, the Lord impressed him, go to every home where you sold books this year and ask them if they want a Bible study, if they want Bible studies. And he obeyed the Lord, and so he went. He had a list of all the books that he'd sold that year, and so he went to every single home. And he asked them, would you be willing to have Bible studies if I could arrange for somebody to give you studies? And I just guess, how many do you think, let's put it percentage-wise, what percentage do you think of the people that he asked if they wanted Bible studies that had bought his books? How many people, what percentage do you think of the people wanted to have Bible studies? Anybody? How many? 50? What? That's exactly right. 100% of everybody, and this is in secular Europe. Dwight Nelson said that it's so cold over there in the churches, you can put on your ice skates and skate right down the aisle to the pulpit. That's how it's in the area of the Reformation. That's what's happened. that's cold over there. The churches are empty, most of them, Protestant and Catholic. And so anyway, he started really, that's when we picked him up and he started working for us. And we sent him a stipend every month. And he's done a wonderful job. He's now the president of ASI for Austria. He's been to the Scandinavian countries and given presentations. He just came back from Bulgaria. He's one of the most sought-after speakers over there. And one little story, he tells his stories all the time, but he said he was going door to door selling books, and he was kind of in a bad area of town in this one city in Austria. And he knocked on the door, kind of in an alleyway. He knocked on the door, and this big burly, he looked like a Hell's Angel type of guy, you know, with tattoos all over, and he was all buffed up, strong, big beard, and just looked really rough. And he said, "What do you want?" And Chris, he said, "Well," he says, I'd like to show you some books that I'm selling. They're Christian books, really good books that shows how to be happy and how to know what the future is going to bring about the Bible. He said, "I don't want any of that stuff. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get out of my face." And he went to slam the door shut, and Chris said, "Well, wait a minute. Wait 1 minute." He said, "If you don't want to buy anything, is it okay if I just donate a book to you? I'd like to just give you this one book just as a gift, and if you don't like it, you can give it to somebody else." And he handed him the book, and the guy just turned pale. And he grabbed a hold of him by the shirt, and he yanked him in the door and slammed the door shut. And Chris said, "I thought this was it, and I thought it's all over for me." He said, "Follow me." He took him in the back room. There's 15 people studying the great controversy in the Bible. All their friends were in there studying the great controversy. They'd been studying it for weeks. He says, "We want to meet this Mr. White. Where can we get a hold of him? This is an awesome book. This whole book is incredible." And they thought it was written that it said E.G. White. It didn't say Ellen, and they thought it was a man that wrote it. And they were so excited, and so as a result of this, they were introduced to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so these are just some of the things that have happened, you know, that God is working in some of the most, how would you say, unexpected ways. We plan to be there in Austria. We're leaving on the 27th of this month. And he has been, now that he's working with us, he realizes the importance of health evangelism. And so if you help people that are sick and hurting and depressed, that's the best. That's what Jesus did. And so that's what he wants to do. And so a wealthy Adventist over there donated 250,000 euros, which is about $300,000. And they built an old mansion out in the woods, in the green forest area of Austria. And it's beautiful. It's about 40 miles from Linz, out in the country with a big pond and lake, and there's deer, and beautiful. It's just a gorgeous place. But it needed a lot of work. It had been in disrepair for a long time. And so anyway, they've been fixing it up, and they're going to have a health resort there, and we're going to go and hold health evangelism meetings for 1 week. And then on the 7th of July, we're going to fly to Bulgaria. And in Bulgaria, they have another couple over there that is doing the same thing. They have a place, an old mansion out in the country, beautiful nature, and they're having a camp meeting there. They expect over 100 people maybe, and they want us to come and give seminars. And we're taking a friend of ours and his wife, Mike Avalon and Jenny. So the four of us we already have our tickets, and we're going to go there, first to Austria and then to Bulgaria for 2 weeks. Just before I left to come up here, I got a phone call from our friend Mike, and he said that in the Dominican Republic, they've just asked if we would come and train all the Seventh-day Adventist pastors in the Dominican Republic, which is over the other half of the island of Haiti. And my father used to be the president of the Adventist work in Dominican Republic, and so since I'm fluent in Spanish, this is going to be awesome because we're going to get to help and train all these pastors in medical evangelism. I mean, God is just opening the doors. I don't know, if I didn't have to pay some bills, I could do this full time. But I'm kind of like Paul, he had to make some tents once in a while to pay for his way, And that's what I think God wants us to do. He doesn't want us to live off of everybody else. And so as long as God is blessing us in our medical work, I have 5 PAs, another doctor, and a couple nurses and people that are working under me. So God is blessing us, and we're excited to be able to do this. So it's important to understand the history of the Waldenses. The Waldenses, it's in northern Italy, northwestern Italy. And if you want to understand about church history, it's important to understand about the Waldenses. I think it's chapter 3 in the Great Controversy that talks about the Waldenses. And you might want to just, when you go home this afternoon or this evening, read that chapter, and you'll be inspired. And she just touched a few of the high spots. But due to several factors, the Protestant Reformation did not generally go far enough, all the way back to the Bible, as you know. But the Waldenses, they came all the way back, clear back to the apostles. And they had the pure word of God. They didn't have a corrupted version of the Bible. And they didn't worship the Pope, and they didn't worship Mary. And Ellen White says they had the pure Bible in their own language. And so clear up until 1532, when they joined the Reformation with William Farel, they kept the Sabbath and everything. But what happened in 1532, they were being persecuted and killed and everything. And when William Farel came down and he said, "Why don't you join the Reformation?" And they had this big meeting for a week. And he said that you can join the Reformation, but you're going to have to give up a few things, like the Sabbath. And some of the Waldensian pastors got upset and left. But they ended up capitulating. And he said, "Don't worry." He says, "When you give up the Sabbath," he says, "just don't do it all at once. Do it gradually, and then the people will accept it." And so that's what happened. So that was kind of sad, but there were some reformers. So these Waldenses were among our spiritual forebears. They were the link between the early Christian church and the churches of the Protestant Reformation. They were the seed of the woman, the church in the wilderness that fled the wrath of the dragon during the 1260 years. So the 1260-year time period, as you know, was a really bad time, the dark time. And it was given 7 times in Daniel. These centuries of severe testing helped substantiate what books constitute the genuine Bible books and to disclose the counterfeit writings. So this was a real important time in church history. Revelation chapter 12 reveals that the complete history of the true church upon the earth was divided into 3 phases. The apostolic church with the disciples is depicted by a woman wearing her crown, had a crown of 12 stars. And then the second phase was the church of the wilderness. That's when they had to flee the wrath, of the persecution. They went into the wilderness. And the remnant church is right now in the last days. So who are the Waldenses? They're prophetic people with a wonderful history. Some people know a little bit about them. Unfortunately, many of our leaders and almost all of our universities have been deceived by the Catholic Church into thinking that they came from Peter Waldo in about the 1100s. That's not true. They came from way back to the apostles. And so we went on a documentary, 10-day, 2 years ago, and we filmed a 4-hour documentary to prove that they went all the way back to the early apostles and that they kept the Sabbath up until 1532. So if you want to see this documentary, it's probably the most detailed history you could find on the Waldenses. You can go to YouTube videos and just type in Waldensian Project, and you'll see all 4 hours. I start with volume 1 and go through. It's an awesome video. We went and we showed a lot of the places, almost all the places where even you wouldn't get to go if you went over there. The tour buses usually have about 50 people, and they can't turn around in some areas, so they don't get to go to some of the really neat historic places. But we went to all these places, and we went to the caves. We went to the places where they killed a lot of the babies and women and children, and you'll see all this on this. But anyway, the papacy tried to show that they go all the way back. But when Peter Waldo, he was a wealthy man in France, and when he decided to become a real sincere Catholic Christian from the Bible, he went to the Pope, and I think it was Pope Gregory, but he went and he says, "I want to preach." And so the Pope says, "Well, what are you going to preach about?" And he says, well, I'm going to preach about the Bible and about the righteous by faith and keeping the commandments of God. And the Pope says, no, you can't preach because you're not a priest and you're not a bishop or a cardinal. So I forbid you to do that. And so guess what Peter Waldo told him? He says, well, it's interesting, Pope. He says, Peter, who you say you're the successor of, he said we should obey God rather than man. So I'm going to go ahead and preach. And so guess what? They were out to get him. And he fled over the mountains into Italy and became part of the Waldenses for about 9 years. And so that's where Peter Waldo came from. He was a Sabbath keeper. If you go to Germany in Worms, there's a big monument of Martin Luther. And there's a monument on each side of some other reformers, minor reformers. And Peter Waldo is sitting over here, and he has his pant leg pulled up, showing his sandals or his shoes were laced up to his knees. And the way he laced up his shoes proved that he was a Sabbath keeper, because they laced their shoes up. The Waldenses laced their shoes a certain way. And when they did this monument of Peter Waldo, they pulled up and showed that he was a Sabbath keeper. And a lot of people that never heard this before, but this is exactly what it was. And so they did not come from Peter Waldo. Peter Waldo joined them, and then later on he went to Switzerland or somewhere. But he was a wonderful Christian man that really loved the Lord and was preaching the truth and even kept the Sabbath. So there's strong evidence that the papacy systematically destroyed most of the Waldenses and all their writings and everything. There's strong proof they did not come from Peter Waldo. They were in existence hundreds of years before Peter Waldo. There was an article that came out in Ministry Magazine. It said it's too bad that Ellen White didn't know her history very well, because she said that the Waldenses were hundreds of years before John Wycliffe. And they said, obviously, she didn't know her history. Well, the problem is she did know her history because God told her history, and we proved it in these videos. So if you want to watch, very interesting, you can watch the 4 hours of videos on the Waldenses, and you'll be greatly inspired. So there was a guy named Renarius Sacco. He was a former Waldensian pastor who apostatized and afterward became a persecutor. He was an officer of the Inquisition. He wrote a treatise against the Waldenses which explained their early origin. He said there were over 70 ancient heretical sects, and they were the worst of all of them because they were the oldest. They went clear back to the time of Pope Sylvester. He said these sects were the worst, the most harmful, causing irreparable damage to the church. And he gave 3 reasons, and he said one of them was because they're the oldest. Thus he showed that the Waldenses were the oldest of all the sects, and they were in existence 600 years before Peter Waldo. And that was one of the Catholic historians that used to be a Waldense. So they desperately tried to date the rise of the Waldenses from Peter Waldo, but they didn't. They weren't successful. The Vigilantius Leo was one of the first Waldense leaders in 364 to 408. And he started working in the Alps between France and Italy. He tried publicly to stop the pagan ceremonies that were being introduced and accepted into the true church. And he was a tremendous preacher, and he was persecuted. And he was the forerunner of the Reformation, one of the earliest of our Protestant forefathers. And he was, one thing I wanted to mention here, that he was hated by the church because he was preaching against the errors of the papacy. And the Latin Vulgate Bible, which is the corrupt version of the Bible that they used for many years in the Catholic Church, they said that he was such an evil man, his tongue should be ripped out of his mouth, Vigilantius, because he did not follow the doctrines of the church. Claude was a Spaniard, and he was a famous apostle of the true Christian church in the 9th century in northern Italy. He became the bishop of Turin. In France, the people who believed like the Waldenses were called Albigenses and Huguenots. So here we are in Italy, and the place where the Waldenses were, is right up here. And these Alps right here are called the Cottian Alps. That means King Kotia in the ancient history. these Alps are like a circle, semicircle, and right here is France, and here is Switzerland, and here's Italy, and right in here is where the Waldenses were. And so you can see that Torre Pellice was the place where the center of the Waldenses for the whole, right here is Torre Pellice. And that was the center of the Waldenses. That's where they trained. You know, you read in the Great Controversy, they wrote scriptures and they put them in their clothes and everything. And this is where it happened. These are the Cochin Alps, and these are the other Alps across here. So it's an incredible story of the Waldenses, how they suffered and died for truth. As you approach Torre Pellice, Mount Costalusa rises higher and higher. It's like a massive pillar. There's 7 valleys, and I'll show you a picture. Here's the pictures of the Waldenses area in the Alps. And this is Torre Pellice, the headquarters of the Waldenses, and we've had a work there. We have a lady that she's working there now for about 10 years. We pay her every month, and her name is Danielle, and she gives tours. This is Costalusa, where they used to throw them off the cliff. You read about that. And so anyway, Chanfaran, this is where they made the decision to give up the Sabbath in 1532 and join the Reformation. Monument there. This is downtown Torre Pellice. It's interesting. Of all the places in Europe, guess when they have the market day? On Saturday. Everywhere in Europe. That's the market day. Guess when they have the market day in Torre Pellice? Friday. Because they used to keep the Sabbath. The people go to market on Friday. They don't know why they're going on Friday instead of Saturday, but that's why. Because for hundreds of years, they kept the Sabbath, and they always had marketplace on Friday, and so now they still do, even though they don't know that that's why. Here's the Adventist church, a little chapel down below. Here's the chapel, and up above is some apartments. Elder Long was the president of the Union in Italy, and he was a purebred Waldense. He just died recently. So here's one of the caves where they used to kill the Waldenses, and I'm inside the cave taking pictures down. There's a church, one of the early Waldensian churches. Inside of the church is very simple. They didn't have idols and things like that. And here's a wood stove, and the pipe goes back and it heats. That's all they had for in the wintertime to heat. And in the front of the church, it says, the cross is the power of God. We preach Christ and Him crucified. That's from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, I think. Here we're training them how to do CPR. Ellen White went there 3 times, and every time they rejected her. There was a man named Miles Grant. He was a non-Adventist pastor that hated Adventists, and he dogged her. He went everywhere she went in Europe. And when she went to Torre Pellice to try to preach to the Waldenses, he rented the hall, the room above where they were going to be, and he hired some ruffians, and they would stomp their feet and make so much noise that they couldn't hear what was going on underneath. And so the Lord told her, don't answer his charges, and about 3 days he got tired and left. But she said, in the last days, somebody's going to raise up again out of the Waldenses, and it's going to be another big revival, and you're going to see the fulfillment of that prophecy here. This is going up to the College of the Barbs. This is the actual college where they used to teach the pastors, you know. Their average lifespan was 2.5 years of a pastor. And then they would be martyred. And so this is where they trained, right inside here. This is not a real old Bible, but it's the place where they put the old Bible. Their only textbook was the Bible for 3 years. And they had to go out and do practical work. And they went all over the world. They went to Africa, South America, everywhere as missionaries. They were people of the Bible. They had the pure Word of God. Now here's a place that nobody, if you went to visit the Waldense area, you would not get to see this because the buses can't turn around. But one of the Waldensian guides showed me this. Right here, in this house, there was a Waldensian pastor that they asked to go to Mass and to give up his Protestant beliefs, and he wouldn't do it. So they started building a wall there, and they built the bricks up around him, When he got up to his waist, they said, it's still not too late if you want to be saved from being killed. We're going to bury you in this wall. And he wouldn't do it. They got up to his neck and they said, you have one more chance. And he didn't do it. And his body is standing up right there inside that wall, waiting for Jesus to come. And I would really like to be there when that wall opens up and when he sees Jesus. His body is right in that. He was suffocated right in the wall because of his faith. This is something you wouldn't see unless you watch the video, the documentary. And there it was, 1683. This is the cave of the church where they used to go in. And I was in there one time with Danielle. She's a guide for General Conference and different people from all over the world. And Danielle had 83 Korean people that she was showing around. And she said, you've already been all around. Why don't you let the Waldensian guide, Adriano, show you some other places? And so I said, yeah. So after they left, he said, I'm going to tell you something about this cave. He said, nobody knows. He said, these caves are like cheese. He said, I can go in this cave and come out 3 miles away on the other side of the mountain. And I can go another passageway and I can go over this way. He says, that's how we escaped during the persecution sometimes. And people didn't know this, but you can actually go around little caves. And so, and I think it's in Psalms or Isaiah where it says that the munitions of the rocks, God would protect his people, And they're like castles up there that protected the people. This is the place that we finally found where they used to take the Waldensian children. They'd kidnap them and raise them to be priests and monks and nuns. And this was the very place where they would take them. Can you imagine having your children taken from you forcefully and you'd never see them again? And they were trained to be haters of the Waldenses. And this is the actual place where they did this, right in this door. This is one of the earliest Waldensian churches. And it says light and darkness. That's in Latin, that's their motto. And this is supposed to be the earliest Waldensian church that goes clear back in the 1500s. And this is the place where the palace in a little town right next door. I want to show you a church and state. Here's the government. Here's the passageway over to the church. That's real church and state. Literally connected by a passageway. I couldn't believe it. At least here in this country, you have across town, you have the church and then you have the government. Over here, they're actually literally connected. And so the church would say, we don't kill any heretics. We just turn them over to the government, and then they do the dirty work. And it's real easy when you're connected like this. So it would be well, she said, for all of our workers to study the history of the Waldensian missionaries and to imitate their example of sacrifice and self-denial. They were brave and not afraid. But you know what? Right now they've apostatized. They've joined with the Methodists back to the Catholics. And they have priests in their churches, and they've given up almost all their beliefs. It's really, really sad. And they get a lot of money because they have taxes from the government. They're very wealthy. And I said, what do they do with all their money? And I found out that year we were there, they had spent 250,000 euros to sponsor the first lesbian conference in Rome. To show you how far the Waldensian church has apostatized. They actually paid for the conference in Rome for the lesbians. God does not give us the spirit of martyrs today, for we have not come to the point of martyrdom. He is now testing us by smaller trials and crosses, and at times when it seems that the billows of temptation will go over our heads, let us remember that the eye of God is watching over us, and let us be willing to endure all the trials that He sees fit to send. They had a publishing work, they had literature evangelism, they had their own church school system, they had pastors, evangelists, literature evangelists, and missionaries. They were medical missionaries. And most of their barbs, their pastors, were actually doctors. And they did natural medicine and they did traditional medicine. The greatest part of them were surgeons and physicians. This is a quotation I'll bet none of you have ever seen before. It comes from a book called the Historical Sketches of Foreign Missions by Mrs. White. I think it was printed like in 1884. You can get a reprint online, but this is original. It says, in their lonely retreats, they, the Waldenses, often met the Redeemer and conversed with him, as did the two disciples on the way to Emmaus. He would there open to them the sublime truths of his word. You know, we talk about the second coming, but Jesus came to Paul on the way to Damascus, personally. He came to John, you know, and we talk about the second coming. He actually went and visited with the Waldenses up in those caves. But his main coming is going to be when he comes in the clouds of heaven with great glory. But isn't it amazing that he went there and comforted them? Not just once, but says often. And I think this was a tremendous blessing to them, and they helped him to stand faithful. Now, here's the last story I want to share with you. On one of the trips a year ago, that tours that Danielle was giving for the Waldensee people, you know, when you come and you want to see all the historic places, this man right here, his name is Esteban Janavel, was on that tour, and he was a Waldensian pastor. And after they got done with the tour, she always gives him a vegan meal and debriefs him for the... And so they were sitting around the table, and all of a sudden he says, you know, he says, the Waldenses used to all keep the Sabbath, Seventh-day Sabbath. And she about fell out of her chair. He's a Waldensee, and he's admitting this. He says, we've done some research, and he says, my group of about 30 people, he says, we're keeping the Seventh-day Sabbath like our forefathers did. And his story is featured in the documentary that I told you about, Waldensian Project on YouTube. And so, anyway, to make a long story short, he's been in touch with the Adventists. He's been to Weimar. He studied under Dr. Neil Nedley for 10 days, and he learned about clean and unclean meats and learned about not eating any meat. He learned what it is to be a medical evangelist, and he said, this is what will win my people to the Lord, and have a revival, is medical evangelism. And he's become a personal friend of ours. He's been up to see us in Idaho twice. And this just tells a story about him. He studied and he has his degree in church history. He's led several groups from Andrews University over there, tour groups. He's the one that told me about the shoes for Peter Waldo. And when he showed the professors from Andrews, they couldn't believe it. And he knows all this history because he's a historian. And I just got an email. He was here just recently in March and preached in an Adventist church for the first time. And he told me in the email 2 days ago that he just went to Germany and he spoke to 30 interdenominational pastors from all over Europe and preached on Sabbath to them. And so we're excited because when we go to Austria, he's going to come and be there with us. And he didn't have a vehicle, and so we partnered with Second Hope Ministries, and we partnered with Weimar, and they gave $4,500, and we gave $6,000, and now he's got a nice little car. Here he is with Dr. Damstedt from Andrews University, great historian in the church. And here he is at the Chanfarin with Danielle. This is Pastor Janaville. His great-grandfather, 12 generations ago, was one of the biggest heroes of the glorious return of the Waldenses. His name was Joshua Janaville. And when he became a Sabbath keeper, they just did everything they could to get him to give that up. They said, we'll give you any amount of money in any position in our church, but just forget this Seventh-day Sabbath. It's an embarrassment to them. And he said what finally caused him to break with the Waldensians, they tried to force him to have gay marriages. And he says, I will not marry gay couples, I'm sorry. And they said, and that was it. So now he has his own independent work, and he's trying to cause a revival of Bible and Adventist Reformation among the Waldenses. Here he is speaking in the Adventist church with Danielle. He goes and he has his own group, and we're supporting him every month. He goes to here he is, he went to a public school, and he says, I was able to share about the Lord in the public school to the students. Here he is with a group of other non-Adventist pastors, Adventist believers. Here he is preaching. Another time he's preaching. Here he's in another church group. He's an incredible pastor. And here he's leading a group of up to where they used to cast off the Waldenses off the rocks. And here he is right here. He's an incredible person, and I hope you'll remember him in your prayers. His wife left him with 2 small children when he became a Sabbath keeper, and she ran off with another man, but now she sees that he's connected with the Adventist church. He's got a new car that we helped him buy, and now she said she's sending him messages. Have a wonderful Sabbath. I miss you. Give the kids a hug. And she fought him for about 5 years. And he still loves her, but we're all praying that if she's really sincere, that they will be able to get back together because he still loves her. And it obviously is really hard on the kids. And so, but he says, I can't take a chance if she's not sincere because it wouldn't be good what happened in the past. Here he is waving at you folks, thanking you. Here he is in front of one of the Waldensian church. He takes tours all over, Adventist tours now too. In an interview in Walla Walla on Blue Mountain Television, one of our Adventist pastors, Johnson, he said, are you going to become an Adventist? And I was shocked that he would ask him that on TV. He said, well, he says, I think you have enough Adventists already. And he said, if I become an Adventist officially and I knock on a Waldensian door, they won't even open the door. He says, I can be an Adventist unofficially and I can have a big influence over them. He believes everything. He's read The Desire of Ages, Steps to Christ, Great Controversy, all these things. He believes every bit of it. And so here he is. He goes to a nursing home and helps old people and encourages them and prays for them every week. Here's the old people. They love him because he goes there and worships with them. Here's the car that we got him. It's a little 2013 Renault. And he's real happy that he's got a car now because he has to drive all over in those roads up on the mountains and everything. Our hearts ascended to God in prayer that the precious light of present truth might reach the descendants of this long persecuted people. We firmly believe that God will open the way and that he will remove the obstructions which now shut the light from them. See, it says, we feel confident, however, that the Lord will again work for this people and restore to those who will come to the light their former purity and fidelity to his service. The clear light of the third angel's message will yet be reflected from honest-hearted in these valleys. The light in them which has grown dim will be brightened. The angel that joined the third angel is to lighten the earth with glory. There will be many, even in these valleys, where the work seemed to start with such difficulty, who will recognize the voice of God speaking to them through his word, and coming out from under the influence of the clergy will take their stand for God and the truth. This field is not an easy one in which to labor, nor is it one which will show immediate results. But there's an honest people here who will obey in time. The persecutions which their fathers endured have made them apathetic and close-mouthed, and they look upon strangers and strange doctrines with suspicion. 2 things helped them change their mind about the Adventists. The Romanian men's choir, which is an awesome choir. I think there's over 100 men. And they went and sang for the Waldenses. And they said, wow, these Adventists, they're not a bunch of fly-by-night people. They're a real Christian people. And then the other thing that happened is the New England Youth Ensemble went and played there. And so now they're open to us, and they've invited us to go and do some health evangelism at their general conference. They call it the Synod. It's like once a year. So things are opening up. It says, the old battlefield will yet be the scene of victories now unseen, and the adoption of Bible truth will vindicate the past fidelity of their fathers. So, may God help us to follow the example of the Waldenses, to be faithful in Bible study, prayer, and witnessing, to stand tall for truth, even at the peril of our lives. Time is very short. May the motto of the Waldenses be our motto. The preaching of the cross is the power of God. We preach Christ and him crucified. You know, Elder HMS Richards was in Portland for the big camp meeting, and afterward I went up and he autographed my Bible right here. If any of you want to see it afterward, it says HMS Richards, 1 Corinthians 2, 1 and 2. For I have determined to preach only Christ and him crucified. That was his motto too, and that was the Waldensian motto, and I believe that should be our motto. Plans for this year, so we plan to spend 1 week in Bulgaria. Possibly we're going to the Dominican Republic. There's a pastor in China that has requested us to come. He said you won't be able to talk about Jesus in the pharmacy where you're going to have the meetings, but he said we'll have a home meeting and you can talk all about Jesus. But it's very strict over there right now. The things are tightening up in China. It's becoming very, very hard to preach about the gospel. We all need to be doing all we can to further the gospel and help finish the work. So I thank you for your attention. There's a lot of other stories, miracles I could tell you, but I think just the main thing is that we need to be prepared. Things are happening so fast right now around the world. I don't think people realize. I could share some things I won't do today, but there are some things that are happening that will make the hair stand right up on your head if you knew what's happening in the United States. One thing that happened when the cathedral of Notre Dame Cathedral burned down during Holy Week, guess what happened? President Trump called the Pope and said, don't worry, we're behind you 100%. We'll send all the finances, we'll send all the people, whatever you need, we'll help you finish and rebuild that. It's the most important cathedral in the whole world. And do you know that during the Inquisition and during the hard times, Dark Ages, that's where they used to kill all the Protestant pastors, is in front of the doors of the Notre Dame Cathedral. That was their favorite place of execution, right in front of the doors of the Notre Dame Cathedral. So if that isn't reaching across the hands across the abyss, clasping the hands of the papacy, when the President of the United States says, don't worry, we're gonna help you, we'll build that temple back up again. Remember, that's where the goddess of reason went in, was enthroned in the French Revolution. And the largest chapter in the Great Controversy is the chapter on the French Revolution. You know what she says? That same thing is going to happen again in this country, in the United States. So we need to be ready. We need to be prepared, not be afraid, but we need to go forward. And I want to thank you for your attention. Thank the pastor for allowing us to share with you today. And we're really happy that Boriana is part of your congregation. She loves this church. And thank you for what you're doing for her and for Jasper and Barron. And just hope that this has been a little bit of inspiration for you so you can see what God is doing. And remember that each one of you can have something special to do for the Lord, and He'll tell you exactly what to do and how to do it. So can we just stand and we'll have a closing prayer, I think. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for this church. Thank you for this pastor that's leading out here. And thank you for all the people that came this afternoon. I pray that you will bless this church and make it a lighthouse in this community. And bless all their activities. I'll bless all the young people that are involved, the children and the older people. And help us that we will all work to help finish your work. And not in a legalistic way, but in gratitude for what you've already saved us. That we will want to obey you and serve you, live holy lives for you, only with the grace of your power and because of the blood that you shed on Calvary for each one of us. That's the only thing we have to commend ourselves to you. So we claim the promises that you will save us, that our names will be written in the book of life. We can soon have a home with you in kingdom. Be with all of our families and relatives that are not in the fold of safety. And please help us to know how to reach them. And so thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.